Hello?
Greetings.
Who's there?
I'm Detective Sergeant First Class Harry Gavel, Camden County Prosecutor's Office Homicide Division, retired. Listener discretion is advised due to the graphic nature of the content. The following episode recounts the details of a real homicide investigation. All information presented is taken from public court records, law enforcement files, and direct investigative experience. The names of the victims and individuals involved are used with the utmost respect. No part of this story is intended to exploit or sensationalize their suffering. As a retired homicide investigator, I believe these stories matter to honor the victims, to understand the truth, and to bring closure to the families left behind. Some contents may be disturbing to listeners. Discretion is strongly advised. I call this case the Mastermind of Murder. The victim, Robert C. Barr, a white male, age 30, has full custody of his 3-year-old son, Brandon. He is shot 6 times through the chest and body with a large caliber semi-automatic handgun, a 9mm. It ripped through his chest and body as he fell to the floor in his own foyer, bleeding to death, helpless. On this particular night, he had a friend staying over, Matthew Stem. Matthew heard the knock at the door. He couldn't imagine who could be at the door. After all, both of them looked at each other. They were downstairs in another room watching sports events on TV. They were enjoying a pizza in each other's company. When the knock came, it startled them both. No wonder. It was 3:20 a.m. on a Sunday. Who could possibly be at my door? I'm sure was his thought. Little did he know, still clad in his socks, when he got up the stairs to answer that door, he was nanoseconds away from being shot to death and crumbling to the floor in his own foyer and lying in a pool of his own hot blood. Matthew was shocked beyond shock. During the interview with Matthew, he states that he got a very quick glimpse of the shooter. He could tell us it was a male. The door was still hanging open at the front of the property where the shooting occurred. He cautiously looked outside and observed what he believed to be a man in dark clothing running and stepping into a waiting vehicle that was being driven away by what he believed was a female. That was it at the scene. Police were called. I met Cherry Hill Detective Richard Rubelewski at the scene of the crime. I responded from the prosecutor's office, and we began our investigation slowly, tediously, and determined to get the answers to this baffling scene that lie in front of us. Crime scene was called to the location. Crime scene yellow tape was installed. Police were all over. Outside the house, we stationed the Cherry Hill uniformed officer at the door, and we commenced our investigation as crime scene techs attended to the now very deceased Robert C. Barr, measured, photographed, videoed the scene in its entirety. 6 empty shell casings were photographed, marked, and labeled on the floor at the crime scene, both in the foyer and just outside the doorstep of the front door. That's what told us the caliber of the weapon. Of course, they were checked later for fingerprints. No such luck. For all intent and purpose, this was in fact a suburban mystery. Detective Rubelewski and I, fondly referred to as Rube, R-U-B-E, commenced our calculated investigation in the downstairs area of the den where Mr. Barr and his house guests had been watching TV just seconds prior to the knock at the door. We scoured his personal papers, belongings, and effects. We took our time. We sorted through all the names in his phone book. We confiscated his telephone. And during the course of that investigation, we came across a name in Robert's own handwriting of a person by the name of Harold Thompson. Now, according to the notes that we saw and the questions that we were asking Matthew stated that he did not know Mr. Thompson personally and did not know much about him or have any information about him other than he knew from talking with his friend Robert that this was a new man in Michelle's life. And Robert was curious as to who this person was, what his background was about, because he had just recently filed for divorce the year before, October the 21st, in 1996 to be exact. But he knew at some point in time, if this gentleman stayed in the life of his ex-wife, he'd probably have access to his child, Brandon, which just really didn't sit right with him. But that's all basically that Matthew knew or could say about that. We viewed it as a name to look into. We wanted to get the background information on him. We wanted to apply for a records check on that individual's name, any driver's license information from DMV, any known criminal record or rap sheet available. Now, Robert, of course, couldn't do any of that. Of course, once we found a rap sheet on Thompson, we came up with his photograph and showed it to our only possible witness that was there on the scene at the time of this murder. In no way could he make any identification. He only had a half a second worth of a view of a man in dark clothing running away from the front doorstep of his friend and into a waiting vehicle. But it was someplace for us to start. After the crime scene techs got finished with their task of collecting and preserving any and all evidence at the scene of this horrific crime, the body of Robert Barr was respectfully collected and taken to the Camden County Medical Examiner's office, A.K.A. the morgue, for a further autopsy, forensic examination, which Rube and I would certainly attend. Nothing of any really additional evidence was found at the autopsy other than the location of where the bullets ripped through his helpless body and the damage that those fierce projectiles left behind. Our next task was to notify the surviving family and loved ones of Robert. we did that. We met with the family. We received background information from them pertaining to what kind of father Robert was, what kind of tumultuous relationship that he was in with his estranged wife, Michelle. There was no love lost between the two families. We knew that our next task after that was to locate and interview the estranged wife of Robert, which we did in very short order. Before interviewing her, we did a background and record check on her and found her residing in the 5800 block of Lower Landing Road in Blackwood, New Jersey. Michelle Barr was a 33-year-old white female, very unassuming. And when we interviewed her about the demise of her husband and what had happened to him, she had a certain kind of attitude about it, I guess you would say. We could tell that she was trying to act sympathetic, but at the same time, as seasoned homicide detectives, we could sense just a gut feeling that something was off with Michelle. Something was way off. When we talked to her about her knowledge of Harold Thompson, she became a little evasive as to not really knowing him that well. He stayed with her there, though, a few times, and she was quick to say that he had a girlfriend. We didn't know it at the time, but she was distancing herself from him by telling us that he had a girlfriend, and her name was Barbara Deems. She was a few years older than Harold, and it appeared that they all three had a relationship where they would spend time in each other's company. Upon some deeper prying, we learned that the trio had met around some sketchy circumstances. They met at a drug rehab center in Blackwood, New Jersey. That was curious to us. We were wondering who was attached to the rehab center. Miss Barr claimed that it wasn't she, and she didn't have any knowledge as to whether Mr. Thompson or Miss Deems were in fact drug users at all. We were soon to find out, though. It wouldn't be long now. We learned in this interview that Michelle was currently out of work. She was a laid-off clerical worker, while her estranged husband, Robert, was holding down two jobs. He was a draftsman for a company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania by day, and by night he worked at the ShopRite in Mount Laurel. We also knew from a previous interview with Robert's parents that Michelle very much viewed Robert, their son, as a meal ticket. Now, of course, we took this information with a grain of salt, especially coming from the parents of the deceased. And in the back of their minds, their thinking was that she had something to do with this. We couldn't go there yet, but we were soon to find out what happened. We were glad that these people were at least speaking to us and not invoking their rights to an attorney before even giving us a chance to get the conversation going. There were no accusations being made yet. We were still early in our investigation. We were at the fishing stage, if you will. We were probing everyone that we spoke to about this matter. Our mission was to gather evidence and hoping that this evidence would lead us to a final victory in helping us solve this massive, brutal puzzle that left a young man, a young father, dead. So with Michelle being very scarce on information pertaining to how we could locate Mr. Thompson and his quote-unquote girlfriend, Barbara Deems, we were able to locate them both on our own. We did some surveillances, we did some more interviews with Michelle. We finally were able to interview Miss Deems by herself. We felt that she might be the weakest link in this case. We learned that they were both drug addicts. Both her and Harold Thompson were in fact drug addicts, and we believed them to be on heroin. Now, I don't know what the audience knows about heroin addiction, but it's one of the toughest addictions that a person could experience. You really have a demon sitting on your shoulder, telling you, screaming at you constantly to get that next fix, to get the money for the next fix. We found out that Harold Thompson had a rap sheet which involved robberies and burglaries. We believed that was the source of his funds to supply his heroin habit. During the course of talking to Miss Deems, we had inquired into the financial backgrounds of Michelle Barr. At some point we learned at a certain date and time, just prior to this homicide, she had withdrawn money from an automatic bank telling service. We were very curious as to where that money went and what the purpose of it was. Michelle couldn't really explain what happened in that situation, why she got the money out and where it went. She played it off basically like she really couldn't remember that. Since it was so fresh, we thought that a little curious if she couldn't remember exactly what that transaction was all about. We wondered, of course, as homicide detectives, we wondered, could this be a murder for hire? Could this have been a planned, calculated hit? We were developing a scenario of who's got the motive to want Robert Barr dead? What's the motive? Now we knew, according to the witness at the scene, that he believed that there was a male shooter at the door, and he believed from his observation that there was a female driver of the getaway car. So we developed a plan to question Miss Deems about her culpability in this homicide. We advised her of her constitutional rights, and we started hammering in on the questions we need answered. Look, we don't believe you were the shooter, but we believe you were involved. If you only drove the car and you're the first one on board, you'll be the one that'll catch any breaks in this case if there are any breaks to be had. We laid it out for her. We hoped that her addiction and her withdrawal, according to the time that we had her, might be working on her psyche. We lessened her culpability by giving her what we call a mouse hole, and she took it. She breaks, she lays the case out, she tells us that Thompson, Michelle, and she had together planned to take Robert Barr out so that Michelle can have custody of her then 3-year-old son, Brandon. The reason being is that Michelle wanted full custody. She didn't want to share custody because she said she was not happy without having her son fully and completely in her life. Now, she was leading Mr. Thompson on at this time, thinking that he might have a long-term future relationship with Michelle if he could only eliminate her husband and get her son back for her, that she would be most appreciative. Now, we also believe that, as well as Miss Deems believed, that there were sexual favors going on between Harold and Miss Barr, but Deems didn't care about that. They were hustling Michelle. It was only about money and drugs for them. She wasn't married to Harold. She was more interested in the money end of things. As long as Michelle was giving them money to supply their drug habit, almost each time that they would visit her, she was happy. And so was Harold. Harold was looking for a relationship with Michelle. There's no doubt about it. All of the facts of our investigation pointed to that fact. Barbara Deems was able to almost pinpoint exactly for us the day that Michelle made a withdrawal from the automated teller machine and paid both Harold and Barbara some money. Sitting here today, I forget the exact amount. After all, it's been 28 years since this murder occurred, and I'm telling you the story from memory and newspaper article clippings. After purging Miss Deems of pretty much everything that she had to tell us, including the night that she drove the car to Franklin Avenue in Cherry Hill, the 600 block to be exact. Her and Thompson had already been to the home several times to eye up the location and to make finalized plans of their attack. All planned and plotted by the mastermind, the estranged wife, Michelle Barr. She described that once she got to the house on this night, April the 13th, she parked down the street, facing away from the home, but she was close enough to hear the shots. She remembered and counted that there were exactly 6 shots. Once Harold ran down the street, was able to get back into the vehicle, she couldn't wait to speed away from her parking spot into the darkness of the morning night. What she told us next even gave us more disdain for Michelle. They had instructions from the mastermind that Thompson was to go to a phone booth immediately after the murder or first opportunity and give her a call, letting her know in code language, that the deed had been done. She wanted to make sure that Robert Barr was killed. At her sentencing in Superior Court, some 2 years after the murder, as she sat in front of Judge Louis F. Hornstein, she made a statement stating that, quote unquote, "I am not the cold-hearted person you think I am. I have to live with this every day," Barr told the court as she held back tears and choked up when she spoke about not being able to see her then 5-year-old son, Brandon, who was in the custody of his parental grandparents. Hornstein answered that plea with, "You are a cold, calculated, and self-centered individual. This whole thing would not have started but for you. I myself, as the lead investigating detective in this case, can also beg to differ with her statement. She is one cold, calculated, conniving, controlling mastermind who thought only of herself. I'm sure that my partner, Detective Rubelewski, would agree. She even had to instruct the killer, the trigger man, to make sure he went to a payphone and called her to confirm her estranged husband was dead. I think this is a good place to also add, these two heroin addicts wouldn't waste their money on buying a gun. Michelle bought the gun herself. She bought it on the mean streets of Camden. She paid for it. She paid for the instrument of death to be used against her husband. If that's not planning and plotting, that you want your husband dead, I don't know what is. Now let's go again back to where our next subject of interest is the trigger man. We always save our target for last. Reason being, we want to have all the information we can possibly have to help us break the case. He was next. We had him picked up and brought to the Cherry Hill Police Department Detective Bureau, which was a room with two-way mirrors all around it. Several of the floor detectives were observing from outside of the room, peering through the two-way smoked glass windows and watching myself and Rubelewski interview and interrogate a one Harold F. Thompson, white male, age 33, drug addict with a rap sheet involving robbery and burglary. We advised him of his rights under the Constitution. I was lead detective, so I led the interrogation. I started with his basic preliminaries. During the course of that interrogation, I advised him that I had already spoken to several people and witnesses surrounding this investigation, and that we were absolutely certain that he was responsible for the shooting death of our victim, Robert C. Barr. We laid out the facts of the case to him. We told him that we knew what he did, we knew who drove him, we knew who purchased the gun, we knew who paid them, we knew how much, we knew why, we knew the motive. There wasn't anything we did not know. Even him hearing that and convinced that we were telling him the truth, he wouldn't break. The man was a drug addict and a streetwise criminal. No easy nut to crack. What cracked this case was that we were in fact intense, number one, and believe it or not, this guy wanted a cigarette more than he wanted freedom, it seemed. At the time, I smoked Marlboro. They asked me for a Marlboro cigarette. He lightly veiled in a statement that he might talk to us if I were to give him a cigarette. During that time, you were allowed to smoke in the police department or public places. Now, I, as a homicide detective or a police officer in general, knew you had to be very careful about giving people gifts for information. Not allowed to do that. And I told him, I can't do that. I'll give you a cigarette when we're done talking, but we're going to complete our interview here first. He insisted he wanted a cigarette. Kept asking me over and over again. I said, look, I told you, can't make you any promises. I can't be giving you any gifts. We kept at him. We hammered at him, back and forth. Good cop, bad cop. We were doing everything. The room was getting very intense. We weren't quitting, and he was starting to fold. Finally, he gives it up. He gives us the whole story. I thought he would be sketchy on some of the details, being on the needle, but the guy was pretty accurate. In addition to everything else that we already knew, when I asked him where the murder weapon was, he told us while him and Deems were on their way back to Blackwood, New Jersey, along the north-south freeway, he tossed the weapon out of an open window of the car into the woods below the highway. After learning this information and wrapping up our interview, we engaged the Camden County Prosecutor's Office and Camden City police recruits. They were having a class in the Camden County Police Academy. We arranged for them to muster up and search the wooded areas along that stretch of the highway. We couldn't be so lucky. The murder weapon was never found. Luckily, we didn't need it in this case, because in this case, we had dotted our I's, we crossed our T's. We were relentless, and we were good, but man, did we have some challenges in front of us. Now it was time to what we call in the business to hang some paper. Let's get a warrant for the arrest of Michelle Barr. My partner Rube asked if he could have the honor of snapping the handcuffs on Michelle. I said without hesitation, absolutely, let's go get her. We made the plan. We met after booking Mr. Thompson. And I'm not sure if we went that evening or the next day, but we went. You can count on that. When we arrived, we could tell by looking at her pale gray face that she was not only scared, I'm sure she was very concerned as to why we were there. She knew that we knew who Thompson was, we knew who Deems was, and she knew that we talked to them both. I guess in her mind, she was hoping against hope that she paid them right and that they would keep their mouth shut. She had no idea that they didn't at this point. We followed her into her kitchen. She turned around and put her back against the kitchen sink. And Rube announces, Michelle, you're under arrest for the first-degree murder of Robert C. Barr. As he reached around the back of his trousers, where he kept his handcuffs, he slowly brings them around in front of her. She sees the handcuffs. He's smiling like a cat that just ate a mouse. And he snaps his handcuffs over her skinny, shaking wrist. To be honest with you, we were both happy that we were able to make a solid arrest in this case. And we were very happy for the statements and the information that we were able to gather during the course of this investigation. And we were able to bring, although not him back, but were able to bring closure. Robert's sister, Cheryl Young, made a compelling statement at Michelle's sentencing in court. She said, and I'll quote, Cheryl Young, Robert Barr's sister, said the family is comforted knowing the judge imposed a maximum sentence. I'll miss my brother for the rest of my life. There is no closure, but justice prevailed. Justice prevailed indeed. Barbara Deans stated in court and admitted that she knew that the killer, Harold Thompson, had a weapon, a loaded weapon, when she drove him to the Franklin Avenue home of the victim shortly after 3 a.m. on April the 13th. Deems says that the wife of the victim, Michelle Barr, withdrew an unspecified amount of cash from the automated bank teller and gave it to Deems and Thompson, who had met and become friends at a drug rehabilitation facility. Deems was given 20 years in prison. One of our top prosecutors in the Camden County Prosecutor's Office, James A.K.A. Jim Lynch, explained in court that she could face up to 30 years as well. I believe she was given 20 without the possibility of parole. As far as Harold Thompson, he received 30 years without parole for being the trigger man. And Michelle Barr, for being the mastermind, she'll have no future with Harold Thompson. She'll have no future with her son, Brandon. And by the way, her deceased husband, in his divorce decree, made it clear and made it known that he wanted to give complete and as much access to Brandon by his mother. But now, as a result of her greed and selfishness, I don't think she'll ever see her son again. Maybe the child, once he grows into an adult, will want to go see his mother as a visitor and talk to her through a thick plexiglass window at Trenton State Prison. She received 30 years without the possibility of parole. Detective Rubelewski is related to me. He's actually one of my daughter's, Dawn's, husband's uncle. So he's related through marriage. I know that this case was very satisfying for him, and I was glad to have worked with him, and I was glad that he was part of this investigation. I think it done his heart well to see this case come to a satisfactory conclusion. I bring this case forward for a very good reason. My own father was a victim of a violent attack in the city of Camden before I became a homicide detective. Matter of fact, one of the reasons I decided to get into homicide investigation was because his killing was never solved. After his assault, he suffered losing a foot, then losing a leg, and then finally having poor circulation and dying from a myocardial infarction due to poor circulation. He eventually received compensation from the Victims of Violent Crimes Board which I arranged for him, but he never got a chance to spend a dime of it. The day after he cashed the check, he was found dead on the couch in the living room of the house he was born in the house that I was raised in, the 1200 block of Sheridan Street, Camden, New Jersey. The attack occurred in Camden, New Jersey as well. But my point is, there was never any closure for me or my family in that case. So I bring this case forward to, in some way, let the family know their loved ones, their murders are not just investigated and not forgotten. Someone always remembers it, just like they remember it. They're remembered by their family and the loved ones that they leave behind, and they're never truly forgotten. Never by the family, for sure. They say that time heals all wounds. Well, that's true to a degree. Sometimes, after the loss of a loved one, you may say to yourself, well, you know what? I just want to forget about this and move on. But do you really want to forget? I don't think you ever really want to forget. You just don't want to remember. But I don't think you can ever forget. Tune in next time for another true murder mystery from the murder capital of the nation. I'm Detective Sergeant First Class Harry Gavel, retired. Camden County Prosecutor's Office, Homicide Division, signing off. See you next time.